Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today we're talking kids and smartphones. I'm joined by Hannah Oertel, who is a therapist and mother living in Scotland, and she founded an organization called Delay Smartphones. So welcome, Hannah.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to dig into this. This is a hot topic and something I'm super interested in. So to delay smartphones is something you hear a lot, and I'd love to talk about why and kind of get into the details around this. So first, I'd love to know more about you, though. So tell me where you're from, a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from London originally in the UK, and then I moved up to Scotland about 15 years ago. So I've always sort of been, passionate about delaying smartphones. It's always something that when I've seen other kids, getting off the bus from school and they're all just, glued to their screens. And I just thought that as more research came out, that other people would want to be delaying more, but it seems like the exact opposite's happened, where kids are getting them just younger and younger and younger in the UK, anyway. But it seems to be everywhere across the sort of Western world.
Yeah, it is.
So when I spoke to other parents, it just seemed like everyone sort of said, oh yeah, it's a bit of a nightmare, but it's a necessary evil. We can't stop this, tech revolution. And this is just how kids communicate these days. Basically, I wanted to delay, we wanted to, but it's not possible. So suck it up kind of thing. And that just made me think, if everyone's thinking this, then why don't we all just delay? Why isn't there another sort of option? And so then I decided to sort of start this campaign, really, to get all this research out to other parents. And that's what I really started digging into, a lot of this research myself. So I think a lot of people are aware of certain things, but probably not everything, and not to the extent. So I thought, if I could have a place, a sort of website that could have all the research and the alternatives, and then what's the kind of process, what's the sort of device pathway that we can take our kids on that's going to suit them and us, and meet everyone's needs.
Right. And you are a therapist too. Who do you see?
Yeah, so I actually have stopped taking on any clients now, because this has really kind of taken over full time. But so I worked with, so it was young people, adults, a big range of people. But I also started seeing a lot more social anxiety that than I had in the past. And it would be things that, the kind of things people were getting stressed about. It wasn't actually just women, it was men as well. But, even things like, what they would wear to a friend's house, when these are people who are like in their 20s, that you just wouldn't expect to see this kind of social anxiety. I think obviously COVID didn't help with all of that. But I think, this is this first generation that really have been brought up, with smartphones and social media from a very young age, and just, seeing the impact of that now. Yeah, that I was really seeing it with clients too.
Okay. And you mentioned that there are some obvious things that smartphones are causing, issues that smartphones cause in younger people specifically, but what has surprised people that you've noticed about smartphone use? What are the things that are pretty shocking that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, the main things that people think about, obviously, is social media, that, people think, hey, this isn't great for, young kids to be on this. And then again, with things like, cyberbullying, WhatsApp messages, things like that. But a lot of the stuff, I think, is the physical health things that people are less aware of. So one, for example, is the spinal damage that we're seeing a lot of. So we know that teenagers are spending on average about 9 hours a day on their smartphones, and the majority of that time they're spent looking down, at their phones. And so the weight of a child's head is about 3 or 4 kilos. And so that weight, pulling forward, that sort of G-force, as I'm told, I don't really understand, but it's pulling downwards. And so their spine, as they're growing, really looking down. And so the weight of that pulling forward on their neck is actually giving a sort of curvature to the spine. And so we're going to see really a whole generation of hunchbacks. And you can start to see it already often with, people who are about 20, if you just start looking around, you'll really start to see it. So that I think is quite extreme. You can with things like that. So for parents who are worried, who have kids who are on their phones a lot, you can, if you lie backwards, like with your head hanging off the end of a bed, or then that does, if you do that for sort of 15 minutes a day, like morning and evening, that can alleviate a lot of that and get the spine back into a neutral position. But I just know from speaking to parents, it's like very few are going to enforce that with their kids, like, oh, it's hanging time, because it's just like, what are we kind of doing to ourselves as humans, that kind of thing becomes necessary. So I think, that's something, I mean, like, and the position that we should be looking at our phones with, is sort of like, directly in front of the right eye height. And it's like, no one does that. But I think the difference for us is that, we got smartphones when our spines were fully formed. And so, and we still have all these back and neck issues, but I think that, if you're giving them to, 9, 10-year-olds, and they're really, that impact is huge. And there are other things with the physical health, again, also like with the eyesight. So normally in life, we are constantly changing our focus from, short-sighted to long-sighted, depending on what we're looking at. And that's what our eyes are designed to do. But again, if they're looking at a smartphone and they're keeping that one point of focus for a really long time, what's happening is that the eyes, that, the muscles are not getting the use in the natural way that they're supposed to. So it's, those cells basically are starting to sort of die off. And so we're seeing now that, kids younger and younger are becoming short-sighted because those muscles just aren't in use. And so it's one thing, okay, you think, okay, more kids need glasses, is this such a big issue? But what's going to happen when they're 70, and we just don't know yet, again, what the impacts of that are going to be. So I think things like this, the physical things, I think often that people don't think about as much. But I think, and then again, with the sort of structural changes in the brain, I think that, again, parents aren't aware of that. Obviously, we know that phones are super addictive, and, that dopamine hit and all of that. But again, that it's these changes in the brain, we really are setting up children, just turning them into little addicts. And so what, again, is that going to mean for transfer addiction in the future? So with, shopping, gambling, porn, all the things that, give you that same kind of hit, with the creating really sort of strong neural pathways in the brain at a very young age, that, again, this is something that now we're seeing, the sort of grey matter just changing in children's brains again. So, yes.
Yeah, those physical things are interesting, and people aren't talking about the eyesight as much, and the spinal damage. It's not something I'm in this space, and it's not something people are talking about. So I appreciate you highlighting that. Parents don't want short-sighted hunchback children. So what? And, and then the access, you mentioned several times, the access to harmful content, social media, too early can cause problems too. So let's get into, we want to delay smartphones. And you mentioned, what did you mention? The pathway, like the perfect pathway or the ideal pathway to get a phone. At some point, they're going to need to have a full smartphone that we have, that has access to everything they need for work and just being an adult human being in today's society. So what does that journey look like the ideal journey?
Yeah, so I think that, as children start to become more independent, so maybe they're walking to school on their own, maybe they're going to the park with friends, things like that. I understand that parents, want to be able to communicate with their children. I think that's normal. Although I would say that children are overprotected, in the physical world today, and underprotected in the virtual world. But even so, that is something that if you say to parents, like, oh, just let them, go to the shops on their own without communication, a lot of parents will have a lot of anxiety about that. So I think that, in the first instance, there are things like the watches. So these watches which are designed for children. There's like the Explorer watch. There are lots of different ones, but basically they allow you to call, maybe 4 numbers, and you can track them as well. So they're very basic devices, and I think would be the sort of first instance what I would suggest. And for some parents that will be enough, I mean, that's all their kids will need really for quite a long time.
Yeah.
But I think then in the next step, it would be, a more simple phone. So a lot of the phones that we had when we were younger, have sort of been re-released. And first of all, these are really cheap. I love these devices, because we give kids, these £1,000, $1,000 iPhones, and then they break them on the first day. And it's like, well, who's going to pay for a new one? Because actually kids should be kids climbing trees, breaking stuff. That's what they do. So I think, these devices are very cheap. And they have no WhatsApp, no Wi-Fi, no social media, if they're set up in the correct way. So they need to have a specific SIM card that doesn't have a data plan on it, because otherwise they can still, even in these very basic ones, can sometimes access, the internet with them. But like, for example, this Nokia, I always have knocking around the Nokia. People think I work for Nokia, so I do not work for Nokia. But yeah, so this phone, like, it's a very basic one, but it also has like the little ear pods in the back, so they can listen to their music with that. I'm sure you can get this in the States, but you can get it here and across Europe, but I'm sure you can. But yeah, so this is like, here it's about £50, so maybe $70 or something. And it turns into a little speaker. They can listen to their music from it. And it has a forward facing camera, not a selfie camera, which is important. So I think, and at that point, with a lot of children, they just want to have a phone. They don't actually care if they're getting a titanium iPhone or these like, cheap Nokias. They just want to be like, oh, where's my phone? So that they can communicate with their friends. They can take some, rubbish photos and listen to their music. And so if we can provide them with all of that. I know some parents will say, oh, but it hasn't got a bus tracker on it. They need to have their bus tracker. I'm like, really? This is the thing that's going to make you like not give them a basic phone as the bus tracker. Or, they'll come up with some app that they think is absolutely crucial for them to have. But actually, a lot of the apps that, for me, that I think, oh, this is really important. It's more when you're an adult, and actually you can get paper train tickets, and you can get a lot of the things you don't have to have these apps for. We're just more used to using them. And so I think that what's important is, yes, we say delay smartphones until at least the age of 14, at least. But again, like if these phones are working longer, I would delay longer. But I think that it's also looking at, well, what's their maturity like with other devices? So if they have an iPad, when you say, okay, iPad time's finished, are they cool about turning that off, putting it back in the drawer? Because what are they like when you're watching TV? So I think that they need to show as well that they are responsible enough, they know how to use them appropriately. And have you spoken to them about privacy online, about grooming, about porn? Like, are you ready to have these conversations with them, and ongoing conversations as well? It's not the one and done. And so I think that a lot of the time, again, when kids are getting smartphones, parents, don't even want to talk about any of this stuff with them. And, then they're not mature with other devices. They're like, oh, it's absolute nightmare. I can't get them off Fortnite. They're, doing it 15 hours a day. How do I, so I think, well, how do you expect then, if you're going to give them a phone, they're suddenly going to be really responsible and mature with that?
Right.
So again, that's why I think it should be more staggered, like anything else in life, because I often use the example of like kids passing their driving test. If they were lucky enough to get a car from their parents, I doubt it's going to be a new Tesla.
Yeah.
They'll be lucky if they get someone sort of, old, rusty, whatever's been lying about car. And I think, well, why would we not do the same with phones, and especially, with the harm that we know can come to kids, through them?
Yeah. Well, and with driving is always that great example of they have to take an in-person class and a written test and drive with someone for a certain amount of time. There's all these safeguards in place to get them up to speed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and I love your quote, over kids are overprotected in the physical world, but underprotected in the digital world. And I think that is
Mm-hmm.
right on. And I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe some of parents' insecurities around what's going on in the digital world cause us to sort of overcompensate physically,
Absolutely.
right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
someone told me that once, that it was, if you leave, because people worry about their children being kidnapped, but in order for your child to be kidnapped, you need to leave them outside in the front garden alone for 14 million years. That's the stat of the likelihood for it to happen. So I'm like, yeah, I know these terrible things happen, but it's extremely rare compared to a lot of these things are real dangers that are happening in children's bedrooms on their phones.
Oh, for sure. And then, okay, so you mentioned starting out with a more simple phone. People call them dumb phones. I think I'm going to start a campaign to change that
Yes.
name because no kid wants a dumb phone. But here in the States, we have several newer companies that are coming up. I don't know if you have access to these as well, but Pinwheel and Bark and Shroomy. Someone mentioned Google has a new kind of pared down
Mm-hmm.
phone. But I have little review videos on those if people want to find out more about those phones. I agree. That's a great starter phone. Those specific companies never allow social media on there. Only one of them has a web browser, but it's very controlled by the parent and what the child has
Mm-hmm.
access to. Very hard for them to like jailbreak it and get around the parental controls. You mentioned the forward facing camera, and I think that that's important. So when I would say when parents are shopping for a watch specifically, I have the Gizmo watch here by Verizon.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I didn't love about it was it has a front facing camera work, and it encourages
Yes.
like selfies and video chats. And,
Mm-hmm.
while video chatting can be positive if, with relatives far away and things like that, I'm not about encouraging the selfies. So if there's
Mm-hmm.
products that we can avoid that type of camera, I think that's a good tip.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, I want to play a little game. So I asked I asked on Instagram, parents,
Mm-hmm.
why did you give your kid a phone? Like, what was the deciding factor?
Mm-hmm.
And a smartphone specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I would love to kind of give you these scenarios and have you either
Mm-hmm.
reply with an alternative, or maybe you agree with giving the smartphone, but just kind of like a quick little back and forth on
Yeah.
these reasons why parents give the phone and maybe why we can think of a different option.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so number one is I got my daughter a smartphone because all her friends had one and she was feeling left out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the most common one of
Mm-hmm.
all that
Yeah.
parents say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that, yeah, so the first thing with that is what is the message that we're giving to kids about peer pressure? If we as parents, in the first instance, when they feel pressured for something, we just straight away say like, oh, it's just too much, just, give in. And so that is really what they're sort of learning, from that situation. And that we, even as parents, we know something's really wrong, but we can't, cope with that pressure either. So I think that's quite dangerous just in itself, because guess what? It's not going to be the first time that everyone else is doing something, and we don't really want them to be doing it. So
Right.
what happens if it's going to be, drugs? Everyone's vaping, everyone's taking nude images of themselves. Like, are we going to say, oh well, look, if everyone else is doing it, just do it as well, because you don't want to be left out. So yeah, that's one thing. But I think that the other part with that is really trying to do it with other families, and finding friends. So I think that, we've had families where we've shown them all the research, we've shown them the alternatives. Their children's already have smartphones, and then they've seen that and they've said, actually, no, we're going to swap it out. And we're going to swap it for one of these more basic phones. I call them basic phones rather than dumb phones, because I know it has a sort of, but I think that, and then doing that with a kind of incentive. So whether that's financial, whether that's offering them something else. Sometimes families have taken away the smartphone, but then given them an iPad at home, which I know, has its own, issues with it, but is still much safer than them having a smartphone. So I think, and yeah, and I think that if it gets to a point where you really feel like it's really affecting their mental health, then I think, you can, get these like Bark phones and, these really pared back smartphones. But I think that I mean, I would still try and delay for as long as possible. So I think, I mean, and it's really also about educating your child too, because if we just say, no, you can't have a smartphone because I say, then they're going to be very, very resistant. But I think that the more that you can explain to your child, especially things like, about the spinal damage, about the kind of content that they might get exposed to. And I think that, I often think with speaking to kids, a lot of the stuff is, kind of goes over their heads, but the older that they get, the more you can explain things to them. But I think, talking to them about, when you've seen something, you have a nightmare and you have a horrible image stuck in your head. I remember being, about 10, and this is when the TV was just channels, and, seeing something late in the evening. It was a horror film. I didn't know. I was at a friend's house, and, and that image still today, it's kind of stuck and burnt into my retina, and so I think that stuff, we know what it's like, for kids, and they know what it's like when they experience nightmares, and say that this is something that someone else might expose you to, something that you're not aware of. Someone sends you a video, you've already opened it, it's too late. So I think educating children is also really important, talking to them about, and it's also all the things that they're not doing when they are on their phones. We know kids are, obviously socializing way less in person, and it's the most boring generation there's ever going to be is this generation that's got phones now, because that's all they want to do. Even when they're right next to each other, they text each other rather than actually speak. And so, I think it's also just encouraging them. It's okay to be a bit different. I didn't get a TV until I was 10. That was at a friend's house, that incident. But I think at the time it was frustrating. There were a lot of things that I felt left out on shows that people were watching that I didn't have access to. But obviously later in life, now I'm so appreciative that I didn't get one in those early years, because it made me so much more creative, and, I'd make my own fun. So that was a very long-winded answer.
And it's interesting you say it's the most boring generation, and it's funny because what they're lacking is being bored.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
The lack of being bored is causing them to be boring.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
And then, I want to follow up on another thing you said there. I think it's so important to find people in your community, other families that are thinking critically about this. And if you don't have that and you're the only one, can you give tips on, or a tip on, like, how to approach other parents? Because that can be very difficult, and other parents can often feel judged about the way that they're parenting. So around technology. So what would you advise parents on how to approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really, really important, because parents do feel often very judged about this. And I think it's really important to sort of start with that. This isn't, about judging. It's just about how can we work together. And so I think, as early as possible, starting to have those conversations, with your friends in your community, neighbors, and really thinking about who are the most important families for you. So who are the other families that you socialize with? They may not even be kids at the same school, but it's really who are those people? And then as early as possible, starting to say, what are you thinking about this? And a lot what I found is that the earlier you talk, most of the time people will say, well, it sort of depends what everyone else is doing. And really that's your in, when you can then say, okay, let's look at all the research together. How about, why don't we, all delay together? Let's all get this Nokia. Let's all do this. And so then it just makes it so much easier that even, okay, it might not be every kid in the class, but you've got a group of people so that they're not going to be the only one. And again, even ones who do already have phones, you can say, would you consider swapping it out? And then, we can do this together. And I think that, again, because a lot of parents are really unaware, of the research, and that, I think that the generation that have just gone, so 10 years ago, I mean, it really is just 10 short years when kids weren't having smartphones. And so we've had a millennia of childhood being based on play, and now 10 years later, childhood's based on phones. And so this generation that have just gone, we've seen that for every year younger that they got smartphones from their parents, the worse their mental health is today. And that's from a study on 30,000, of these young adults. And so, and they're saying, we wish we didn't get them when we were that young. So I think that, 10 years ago, parents didn't have that insight, there wasn't this data, but now that we have that, we can use that. And so I think that it's talking to other parents about that. And this same generation is saying, please don't make the same mistake with your kids now. This has been a sort of nightmare for us. So let's do, you need to do something different. So I think, and just, trying to work together, collaborate rather than it being, oh, you're giving it to them. Oh no, kind of, it's just like, well, how can we all support each other here with this?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let's get back to the game. So
Yeah.
I have another scenario. Let's see. I got my daughter a smartphone because I work and I needed to communicate if I would be late picking up or changing plans.
Yes, absolutely. So, and that again is what a lot of parents will say. They're like, well, of course they need to have a smartphone because I need to be able to speak to them.
Yep.
And again, with all of that stuff, it's like, well, you can do all of that with a basic phone. And so with something like, one of the Nokias, you can just stick on the back a tracker, like, that can be a Tile or AirTag. There are so many alternatives that you can have that will do everything that you need it to be able to do. And the good thing about those phones, like the battery lasts for about a month on them compared to them. Like, I know also that's another thing with parents thinking kids have iPhones and they didn't charge them the night before because they were in their bed, using them. And then it's like, oh, their phone's dead. I can't get in contact with them, which is often even worse because then they are relying on that and then they can't communicate. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I think a watch is a perfect option for a younger kid if you really need to coordinate something. But someone I interviewed recently was talking about Sarah Robbins, who's doing a documentary called Your Attention Please about the attention economy and screens and all of this. And she was saying, we just need to plan a touch more. We stopped like planning ahead, and having those conversations on the way to school. Hey, I'm going to pick you up right here. And, if you're 5 minutes late, you're 5 minutes late. Like when we grew up, so just have you taken every step before getting the device in order to be able to coordinate appropriately? Okay, so this is one I've heard a couple of times. So the scenario is, my husband and I are divorced. I want to be able to talk to my children without going through my ex-husband.
Yeah. So again, why can't they do that with a watch or simple phone? It doesn't have to be a smartphone. And that's the thing, I think, because people will often even say, oh, do they still have these phones? And you're like, yeah, of course, and you can still get them. I think people everyone, I always say this is a nightmare, but everyone has old iPhones in a drawer at home. Their phones get upgraded, they get a new one from work, and they're sitting there. And so these devices, kids start using them at home, often without a SIM card on Wi-Fi. And then it's like, these are the least secure phones of all because they haven't had the latest updates and everything. And so parents say, oh, well, I didn't need to buy one because they're just getting an old one of mine. But surely, isn't this the one decision that we want to be really intentional about and not just have it, oh, well, this is just one that's lying around, so I guess they could just have that. These phones, the basic phones and watches, these are affordable so much more than smartphones. And so even if we have to buy them, surely, we should be choosing that. And again, you can get even the basic ones secondhand for like, nothing on eBay or something if you really, don't want to spend the money.
Yeah. Okay. So last one we're going to do. So my son has a leadership position in middle school and was expected to communicate via Facebook with other students.
So I guess that's something I would probably be speaking to the school about because, it's disappointing. I guess I would say that the school would be encouraging social media use. If that's something that's really necessary in that situation, I guess I would probably say an iPad at home, having Facebook on it where you can highly monitor it. I guess that would be the best of that not great scenario. But in that, probably I would want to be speaking to the school first, because a lot of the things as well that parents will say, oh, my kid says I have to have Snapchat for this project or whatever. And then you find out actually that's not the reality. It's what they're saying is another reason, how they can actually get the social media that they really want. So I think, speaking to the school, and then that might not be the actual reality of the situation.
Yeah, I would be pretty upset at that scenario too. Okay, so let's keep talking about phones in schools. So here in the US, I think it's like 80% of schools are trying to implement phone bans in schools or smartphone bans. There are private schools who have better funding who are providing light phones, for example, to all the staff and all of the kids. I'm not sure what's going on there in Scotland, but what are your thoughts on smartphones in schools. Should they be allowed in schools? And
Yeah.
how is it affecting kids in the school that you're observing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, with anything that is harmful for children, that's where we have really laws and policy to help protect children, and I think if you think of sort of back in the day, kids would be 7 years old, chain smoking down coal mines, and everyone was fine with it until we weren't, and then,
Yeah.
we created laws like you can't be smoking until this age and children shouldn't be doing hard labor at that age. But I think that, so with phones in schools, I mean, speak to any high school teacher and they'll tell you it's an absolute nightmare. Girls will hide their smartphones in their bras and go to the toilet to meet up to vape and, all of these things. So it's really, really difficult to get kids to concentrate when they have way lower attention spans than they've ever had before. Mm-hmm. They're obviously getting this, from research, even if a phone is in their bag, even if it's not on them, it's still really distracting if they just know it's near them. Mm-hmm. So I think that, for teachers, it's really difficult. Then we've got obviously all the things like, the cyberbullying that, I've heard from kids saying, they've been getting change for like their PE lesson and girls having photos taken of their hairy legs posted, around the class. I mean, there's just so many things where it's a scary place to be, where if you, at any moment you could be filmed, and that can be just posted, to everyone. So teachers will say, they absolutely don't want it. But I think we're also living in a strange time where the rights of children are sometimes sort of coming up higher on the priority list than protecting children. And so it's difficult in that way, because a lot of teachers will say, well, we'll tell them how to use them responsibly. We train them how to use them responsibility, but we want to leave this decision up to them, whether they want to have a smartphone in school. And personally, I think that's ridiculous, because I think, smartphones are very harmful for children, as all the data and research shows. So we should be first implementing, law and policy to be able to protect them, especially in a place of education and development, which, is supposed to be supporting them, with that. And it's funny because teachers will say, if you go into a high school that allows phones and you go around at lunchtime, it is bizarre because it's silent. It's just everyone's there, just very quietly messaging, scrolling, whatever they're doing, and it's like, this is not normal for a group of children at this age. They should be running around being annoying, but being kids. They shouldn't be silent. Like, it's the most depressing thing ever. And I think sometimes some part of the teachers like this way of, it's like kind of calmer, it's like they're quiet, they're sitting there, they're not racing around, they're not loud, and they're easier to manage. So I wonder if there is a part of teachers saying, oh, it's fine that they have phones because this just makes my life a little bit easier. In the same way that I think parents also can be like, oh, look, they've got the phone, it's a nightmare, but they're just, they're kind of kept quiet. So in England, phones have been banned in schools, but it's a very kind of loose policy, I would say, because they're not really enforcing it. Unlike sort of Australia, where it's really become law, they're very, very strict with it. In Scotland, they haven't been banned. At the moment, the Secretary for Education is saying she supports head teachers who want to ban them. But they're saying they're going to bring out new policies imminently, which I hope is going to be, a ban. But I think it's also, it's difficult to enforce. That's the thing. It needs to be a sort of, because obviously a lot of parents want them to have them on that journey, and especially kids who have had phones for years. You can't just say, oh, they can't have smartphones anymore. Right. That's very, very complicated. So having some kind of box or, locker that they go in when they arrive and they get them back at the end of the day. But obviously kids will just say, oh, I haven't brought my phone with me today. So I think that is the thing. And they think, schools which are sort of, underfunded, understaffed, for them to really enforce that. And I think that's maybe for a lot of schools, they're thinking, oh, we don't want to put the ban in place because, then when we don't sort of follow through, it's not going to look great.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of parents get upset. That's my property. I don't want you touching my property. And technically,
Absolutely.
I don't know about everywhere, but teachers are liable. If they grab that phone and take it, then the kid can be like, oh, you cracked my phone or damaged
Absolutely.
it in some way. So it's really tricky. And I think for me, I mean, we parents can support teachers in the learning environment our children are in by not sending a phone at all.
Yeah.
Doing more basic phone. And what do you think about devices being given in the classroom? So, for example, my kids' school district, they're all given an iPad in class and they use
Same.
it to support their learning. Yeah. So, what do you think about that?
We all absolutely hate them. It's really an absolute nightmare. So my daughter got hers last year when she was 10, and then yeah, they all get them from the council here as well. And but what happens is that they're told, oh, this is a wonderful thing. It's digital equality, that everyone's given an iPad, but then they are supposed to be using them for homework and things, but obviously they just on Minecraft all the time. Then they all have these class chats and things. So, and it's very difficult to go in because you can't. It doesn't have I don't have the full parental controls to it because it's the school has the controls, and then they have their own password set up and all of this. So it has been difficult for us, and I know because every parent's like, oh, please, can you get the iPads banned as well? And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh no, that's someone else can deal with that. But I think that again, this is another sort of giant experiment. Like no one really knows. And I mean, again, you go into school and again, you look at the posture when they're using them. And I'm like, well, why aren't they having like special stands for them or something if you really want them to be using them? But look at their body positions. Like this is not okay. And they're like, oh, but isn't it great? We've got all these free iPads. So I think, I mean, we know from research that anything that is read on a screen, even like a Kindle or something, we will retain 20% less than if we read it like in a book.
Mm-hmm.
Same with like writing stuff. So if we write by hand compared to typing. So I think that yeah, they're growing up in a digital world. And I think I understand if they have them at school. I do not think they should be brought home at all, ever,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone has devices in their house anyway. If there is there are families who do not have any devices in their house, then absolutely it should be means tested for them to be able to have one that they can take home. But I
Mm-hmm.
think a blanket, because with your school, are they taken home as well or are they left at school?
So starting in kindergarten when they're 6, they get one in class, and then in 4th grade, so that's probably 10-ish, they get to start
Yeah.
taking it home.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids are only 2nd and 1st, my older ones, and I'm tempted to say no. I'm not going to bring it home. And where's
Mm-hmm.
the option for parents to make that decision? We don't do devices and tablets in our house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And is there a paper
So,
option for the homework? Like
well,
I don't know.
yes, absolutely. Well, that's what we had, but they apparently, with our school anyway, they don't have the insurance for them to be left at school, so they have to take them home. But I know, but the whole thing is like, I mean, it is because literally every parent is like, this has just become a complete battle, and because it's like schoolwork, but it's not schoolwork. You can't. It's like you don't have the authority because they're like, oh, my teacher says I have to be, you
Right.
know. Yeah, it's terrible. But I feel like the only benefit I would say of that is that when other parents said to me, well, they have to take their smartphone to school because they need it to take photos of the homework or whatever, then I'm like, well, that's what they can use their iPads for,
Mm-hmm.
because they have all got them now. So that's
Sure.
the only benefit that I'm like, well, they definitely don't need smartphones because they've got that, little other
Mm-hmm.
giant smartphone.
Right. Well, and Apple's very smart giving all these free iPads to
Of
schools.
course.
They are getting those customers when they're young, and they're going to be lifelong Apple
Certainly.
customers because they're used
Yeah,
to
yeah.
that functionality. And did you say the kids are able to access like Fortnite, did you say, on those iPads or games?
No, I don't know. I don't know what. No, but
Okay.
they can. I mean, like, there's already ways though that they can hack them, like get on YouTube and things like that with them, which they're not supposed to be able to do. But it's like, I mean, like anything, isn't it? And I think that's the thing as well with parental controls, that a lot of parents will think they're like, oh, I've put on parental controls, so
Mm-hmm.
we're really good on that stuff. And I'm like, give me your child's phone. I'll get violent porn up in 2 minutes. Give
Yep.
it to me. It's got parental controls on. And they're like, what?
That's what I
And
did.
that, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they don't realize that it's just all these ways around stuff. I mean, you just can Google it and it will just, they just teaches them how to bypass all of this stuff. And, I think someone had a kid who they'd set the time zone in the evening to like Nigeria. And so that the time zone, whenever like the time had finished, they could just go to Nigerian time zone and get like another 5 hours or something. So, they're
Oh,
so creative and they'll
yeah.
always share these kind of things that I think that's again that yes, okay, a really sort of stripped back, pared down iPhone, with all the right apps on and everything can be close to safe, but who's going to be that on top of it or checking it constantly that they're not bypassing this stuff, because they will. And parents say to me like, oh, they managed to unlock it but we don't know how and they won't tell us. I'm like, go figure. I'm like, of course
Take
they're
it
not going to tell you.
away.
Yeah, exactly. Just like that's why they're not showing the maturity. They can't have that device yet because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they're clearly not old enough to be able to deal with it responsibly.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about sort of the journey. I want to make one point that I think it's important for parents, and I wonder if you agree, that they
Mm-hmm.
are letting their children use devices that the parents own. It is not a gift to the child. It does not
Yeah.
belong to the child while they're in your home,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you start with that when it is necessary, when you can justify that it's absolutely necessary for you to get a hold of your kid or know where your kid is. The
Mm-hmm.
watch, start with a watch. There's lots of brands.
Mm-hmm.
You can communicate with them. They can communicate with you and you know where they are. I think those are the main things that parents first
Yes.
want. And
Mm-hmm.
then when you feel like they need more functionality, whatever that may be, a basic phone, not a
Yeah.
smartphone. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so certain countries have access to specific companies that create these, or just go get a Nokia phone or a flip
Yeah.
phone or just any
Yeah.
kind of basic phone. And I assume you would
Mm-hmm.
just go to, like, I have AT&T service. I would just go to the AT&T store and ask for the basic
Yeah.
phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And then when your kids are, for me, I'm going to throw out late teens.
Mm-hmm.
When you feel like you need to start preparing them to use a full blown smartphone that has all of the
Mm-hmm.
functionality that they're going to need in the adult space, what does that transition look like? How do you recommend parents make that switch?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when a smartphone is first given, I would say not having the App Store on at all. And really taking off the internet browser as well, and then doing it in a kind of staggered way. So again, like maybe having an iPad at home or so, or a laptop, a family laptop that you use at home. So if they need to be looking stuff up, researching, applying for jobs, whatever, you have a device. It's an open kind of device of like, this is what we use, as a family. And then, their phone then is really, yeah, for the things that they do need. So maybe it is, it's got the weather app, it's got their calendar on it, it's got, the things that are more necessary, bus tickets,
Mm-hmm.
and then, yeah, as they get older, then it's like, okay, we start to, and with all of it, it's let's try this out for a while. Let's see how we go with this. And then if it's not working, we're going to pull back again. If it's
Mm-hmm.
going well, we give a bit more, and we just it's that kind of dance the whole way, rather than what's happening at the moment that I see a lot of parents saying, okay, here's your iPhone, there you go. And it's like, well, wait a minute, what's the boundaries here? What have you got any rules in place? Like, what have you decided as a family you want your sort of smartphone part of your life to look like? And is that something that you've really talked through and sort of agreed together? Because I think that it's easier to start off stricter and then loosen up and go the other way. Because from a lot of parents that I've spoken to, they'll say, oh, wow, we started off, we said, they couldn't have them in the bedrooms and they couldn't have them at the dinner table. But we just, it was too much of a fight. So, yeah, I mean, they listen to their music. So we couldn't stop them. Now they just have them in their bedrooms at night, 11-year-olds, and you're like, oh, so I think that, it's first sort of preparing when you're going to do this. I love, the sort of idea of a phone contract and really deciding together, talking it through, even with a basic phone, because even with a basic phone, you can still get quite out of control, with using it
Yeah,
constantly.
sure.
But then I think, when they do have that smartphone, then saying, okay, we're going to try it out like this. So this is you're going to have a period of 2 weeks and we're going to evaluate again after that period. These are the apps that you're going to have on it. And then, both sign it and then and these are the days where maybe, Sunday's going to be a phone free day for the whole family. They're going to go in a drawer, or all the phones go in a drawer in the kitchen at a certain time. We don't have it when we go, out for dinner. If we go on holiday, you'll get an hour a day on the phones. Otherwise, they're in the hotel in the safe, whatever it is, but kind of working out together what that's going to look like. And then, depending on how that goes, then, you can kind of edit it. But each time saying, okay, now we're going to try this for a month and let's see how this goes. Now we're going to try it for 6 months. And at any point during that period, if they break that contract and your trust, then we say, okay, I'm afraid, it's not working out. You've broken the contract. So now you're going to go back to the Nokia. We'll try it out. We'll try again in a month if you can show that more maturity and responsibility. And I think the thing is that a lot of parents will say, oh, wow, they're getting older, they have to grow up and they have to do these things. But at the end of the day, I feel like our role as parents is to help our children, be as resilient as possible, in this world, and, bring them up to be, safe, kind, happy people. And so if they're living in our house, it is our rules. If they live somewhere else, then okay, that's a different matter. But it's like, if they still are living with you, they're still under your guidance. And some of the decisions that we make, they may not agree with, and that's okay. I think it's that sometimes parents feel like, well, if they're not happy with it, we need to do something else. And it's like, no, sometimes being a parent it's not always doing what they want is the challenging part, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and they think they're going to be happier with the phone, when in actuality, research shows they will be less happy once they have any kind of phone. Introduce that phone, you're going to start dealing with parenting issues and mental health issues in your home. So you have to be ready for that. So I love the idea of the contract or the plan or the agreement or whatever you want to call it, and then checking in on a monthly, biweekly, some kind of regular basis, and make those agreements with them. This is what we expect. And let them suggest too, like, what apps do you feel like you need access to, and we can discuss it. And then we'll try it out for the next period of time and see how it goes. Okay, so I know we've been talking for a while, but I wanted to touch briefly on social media. I just like to ask anyone I talk to, what age do you feel like kids should get access to social media? So what would you kind of say, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I say to other people, 16 is the minimum I would recommend. For my children, I don't want them on social media ever.
Me too.
So
me too.
I've told them 21. I'm like, we'll keep it at that, for now. I just don't see the benefit to it, personally. And I just see a lot of, huge problems that come with it, heartbreaking problems. And so I think that, I just don't think it's a good idea. I know that there will be a, pushback a lot, from that when, all their peers are on it. But yeah, it is something that I just think it's just not going to be good for our family. And I hope that they can continue to have friends that are also not on social media. And I do think there is going to be more of a kind of backlash, with this next generation. Because there have obviously been so many kids whose images have been shared without their permission, parents being like, oh, let's just post this cute little picture of you in your nappy, and, all these things that then later they're going to be like, I'm not really cool with that, actually. And now, and so I think that, more people are going to come off it. But maybe that's just me being hopeful. I don't know.
I think we're all getting smart to it. We're getting smart to big tech that exploits our children and serves them harmful, addictive content on purpose to get them to stay on the platforms. And they do it more for kids than they do for adults, because kids are susceptible and impulsive.
Of course.
So,
and I think it's explaining that to kids as well, that it's like, it's when they're younger, it's difficult for them to understand, but that, like, you are the product. Who do you think's paying for social media? If you're using this and you're not paying, other people are paying to, for your attention. And it's that, like, explaining that to them and be like, do you want to be for sale? You're for sale, but you're not getting any of the money. only these other companies are. And so they're taking advantage of you. And so I think that, like with smoking, where there was, for ages, kids, they were really pushing sort of adverts for kids to smoke. And it was only when, I think there was an interview, I can't remember when it was, but, with one of the big tobacco CEOs, And they asked straight out, look, is it about people or profit? And they were like, profit. And then straight away, it was like all the kids, they were just like, no, we're not doing it. Now they all vape instead. Yeah. but I think that, again, it's like that. None of the Silicon Valley, CEOs, billionaires would ever give their kids phones or social media. Like, they wouldn't dream of it, but then they all laugh at the sort of peasants who don't know, who will just be like, oh yeah, we'll have it for our kids. And so I think the more that we kind of wise up to that, and kids as well, then it's a bit like, oh, actually no, you're all right, I don't want that. So that's what I really hope. And because there are more of this sort of Gen Z speaking out, being like, we've had this and it's really not worked out for us, look at us all, we're a mess.
For sure. And I think we're heading in the right direction. I think through the conversations like this that are happening all over the place, and more research and more legislation and more regulation, I think that we're heading in the right direction. But what I try to focus on is parents, you can make an informed decision around these things. Yes. And I want to help you make the safer decision in delaying smartphones. Here's the perfect journey to giving your kid access to devices, and when it comes to social media, also I'm on the same page that my children will not get access to social media. I don't use it personally. I only use it to promote these messages. And don't see the benefit, at least benefits outweighing the risks. Not even a close race there. Okay. So Hannah, where can listeners connect with you? Tell me about Delay Smartphones and what you're working on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just want to say, when you just said that with parents, the control we have, it just like, and the power, that I think, it is really that no matter what we do, our kids are going to do so many of these things that we'd really rather they didn't. But, with smartphones, it's, we really do have so much responsibility and so much power to really listen to that generation that have just gone, who are saying, do something different. And, the only way they're getting access to all of this stuff, having all these mental health, issues, this absolute crisis that they're having, and just, not just the, mental health, but, the physical changes, the social development, like all these terrible, harmful things, is because as parents, we are putting the smartphones in their hands. And so just by us pulling back on that, we can have a huge impact. So for us right now, so we're just launching as a charity at the moment, which is really exciting. And we've got really big plans for this year. So what we want to do is get for us volunteers, sort of ambassadors across every school in the UK, to really just get the research out about what's been going on, but also about the alternatives. And then when parents are ready to give their kids a smartphone, what are the steps that they can do that in the safest possible way. The website is delaysmartphones.co.uk. And then we are on social media on Facebook at Delay Smartphones. We're a little bit Instagram and Twitter, but I'm just going to leave that for now.
I know.
Because it's a bit inconsistent. And then on the website, you can have a look at all the research, and also get in touch through there if you want to, if you've got questions and things.
Okay. And thank you for organizing the evidence and the research. I think that when someone like me, who's thinking about going to the school district and talking about devices in schools, or sitting down with parents and trying to get on the same page, having a snapshot of the research around how smartphones are affecting and devices are affecting our kids physically and mentally is really important. So, guys, go to delaysmartphones.co.uk. And under evidence, I'm looking at it now. There's tons of good research. Thank you and it's fully updated. I love that. Okay, Hannah, anything else you want to share with parents before we go?
I'm trying to think. Not really. I think, I think that, we are going to look back sort of a couple of decades from now and just be horrified at what we let our kids be exposed to. And I know obviously things are changing all the time. Just with technology and what's available. But I think that we really are in this kind of point where we either continue in the path that we've been going down, and it's not looking good, or we can just say, actually, this isn't working. Let's do something different. Let's pull back from this, and let's really, protect our children again.
Yeah, we can't continue down this path. It would be devastating.
It would be.
Yeah. So Hannah, thank you so much for spending all this time with me today. This
Oh, thank you
was,
so much for having me, Nikki.
of course, and I hope parents gain some clarity around when to give their kids a phone, kind of how that journey looks. And thank you everyone for listening. I appreciate you, Hannah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.